Hopkinton. This is the October 29th, 2020 school committee meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody. We're here at Hopkinton High School, and we have the public participating remotely via HCAM through its many channels. At this time, I would like to invite those who are willing and able to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So tonight we did not receive any public comments. We did receive an email asking for a future agenda item, but no public comments. So we turn now to the financial report. Ms. Roderick.
Thank you. You'll see from the executive summary on the very first page that at this point in time we are running a grand total variance deficit. And this really is attributed to the positions that were hired at the high school and the nursing positions, which were additional positions that were needed to cover for COVID-related either teaching or safety. You'll see below that a lot of that additional hires we were able to cover through personnel attrition. Some was also covered through the CARES grant, but right now that does end December 31st. So at this time, that is the deficit that we are running. That is it for now. Continues to be a moving target, both expense-wise and personnel-wise, as we continue through the school year.
So after, I know we don't know, but after December 31st, if we project out, if we don't receive any additional support from the government, are we okay with, are we going to be able, are you projecting that we'll be okay without additional funding to support these positions?
That's what this is.
Okay.
So this is the projection through the rest of the year with no additional CARES funding.
Okay. Are there any questions for Ms. Rademacher? No. Thank you. Thank you very much for keeping an eye on this for us. Dr. Cavanaugh? Sure. Superintendent's report.
Sure thing. So this is the Superintendent's report for October 29th, 2020. Just a very quick COVID-19 update. I know people are curious about the numbers of cases that we have had in our schools. So I have delineated those by school. At the high school, we've had 4, middle school 1, Hopkins has not had a case, Elmwood has had 2, and Marathon has had 2. And of those 9 cases that you see there, 3 have been educators, 6 have been students. In terms of school closures, because I think this has been something that has weighed on parents and families' minds, I feel like the schools are now getting a whole lot better at managing and isolating our closures. We had early on, a day where we actually closed down the entire district for 2 days. But when you get sort of good at kind of navigating, what does it look like to go through the contact tracing process? How do you alert families? How do you alert teachers? What are the kinds of messaging that has to go out in terms of email and in terms of phone calls? We're getting faster and more proficient with that. So we have had individual classrooms since then that have had to go remote, but for the most part, other than Friday, October 23rd, when the 9th grade went remote, that was kind of a situation that arose at 5 o'clock at night, and we realized that there would be so many emails and so many phone calls to have made on that evening that it just made sense to close that grade level for a single day and then get everything back in place, and when we knew who would be close contacts and who would not be. As we know, when you have a case, they'll tell you that they had been in different places and with different people, but ultimately public health officials determine who is and who is not a close contact, and sometimes that can take quite a while. And I do want to just have a thank you to our partnership with the Board of Health. They've been really wonderful working with us, regularly, and when we call them, they are attentive and What we should also point out is that they are not just sort of at our beck and call for COVID cases, but they can be outside, approving wells or doing water tests or, having a flu vaccine clinic. So there's a lot that goes on for them, and we are kind of grateful for that partnership and the attention that they pay us. And the last thing I want to talk about are the new cases in Massachusetts, and I have put up the last 8 days so that you can see them, including the count that came out today at 6 p.m. So as you can see, if you've been following this since, March, and then how low those numbers went over the summer, you can see that they are getting back up there and getting pretty high again. So they've been right around 1,000 perhaps each day, and last Thursday would have been 986 and 968, and we haven't seen a day under 1,000 since then. So they've been 1128, 1097, 1216, 1025, 1137, and an all-time high today of 1243. So numbers are going in a very bad direction, and I think I'd put that up there just to remind families to, when we look at that, that small logo that the health department has put together, the It All Starts Here, it's just so important that families and students are going through those best practices, washing their hands, wearing their masks, keeping socially distant. And, I can still say, knock on wood, that we have had no transmission within the schools. So if someone has had the virus and brought it in, we've identified all the close contacts and still not had any transmission, really, knock on wood.
Wonderful, that's great.
We have what I'm calling business as almost usual at Marathon, so you can see kids out on the playground, and other than wearing masks, and those are preschool students, it looks just like a regular school day would. And on the left-hand side, you can see kids eating lunch in the cafeteria, everyone facing in one direction, all sitting 6 feet apart, but they're really adorable. When you go in, they chit-chat with you, and it's as if they don't know that they're 6 feet apart, and they're just taking their masks off to eat lunch. It was a lovely day at the Marathon Elementary School. I know that it's only October 29th, but given the fact that we could have 1 to 3 inches of snow overnight, I thought maybe we should just have a very quick discussion about this. So we have said that our snow days will become remote days. So if you are an in-person learner on that day, you'll get Zoom links from your teacher, and you will be learning remotely. If you are an asynchronous learner, you will remain an asynchronous learner on that day. And the only way that we would be, kind of shutting down our buildings for the day or not having any business with our kids is if there was just a widespread power outage. In that case, you'll be alerted this school is canceled for all. And we do have our survey on hybrid and remote instruction coming out on November 2nd, so I hope the parents and guardians will be watching for that, high school students as well, because you'll also be a part of the survey. And I wanted to include this. This came to us from the Hopkinton Board of Health. You can see their handy logo in the upper right-hand corner. There will be trick-or-treating in Hopkinton, and what they wanted us to remind you of is that kids going out to trick-or-treat should be wearing face coverings, socially distancing, practicing good hand hygiene, and staying home if you are unwell. And if you would like to, visit their website, the town website, HCAM's website, you will also see some just, guidelines if you are the parent or the trick-or-treater, or if you are a participating resident. So I thought that was a very nicely put-together document. And that is all I have for you.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question. Thank you for the update. Can you help me understand on the contact tracing? It's great to see that it's being done faster, but it almost feels like from the urgency of the school decision on trying to maximize the number of days in school for kids, it's urgent that the contact tracing be done in even shorter time periods, right? Like if we could have had a way to get it done last Thursday night, I know it was only at 5 o'clock when it started, but we could have had it another day in school for the 9th grade.
Yes.
Is there any thing needed on the resource side in the health department, for example, to ensure they have enough contact tracers? Are you confident there are enough contact tracers to get that done in a shorter time frame each time we do it?
So I'm glad you asked that question. If the case happens to be, say it was an Elmwood School case, and we were looking at, kids who come to school on the green day, there may have only been 10 kids in that classroom who would have had exposure. And then what we typically do is we call the families who are the students north, south, east, and west. And so that would mean that we were really kind of calling 4 kids in that classroom. But because of the nature of a second grade classroom, we really might call all 9 families and say, your child's a close contact, so we're going to do remote instruction. And it's pretty easy to make 9 phone calls and then send out the corresponding emails. But when we are talking about a case in the high school, we have to remember that that student goes to 5 different classes during the day. And, the student might be, someone who partakes in, athletics or some other activity, say, for example, they were, part of robotics and they were outside, even kids are socially distanced and they're 6 feet apart, but they're working in, a robotics situation out in front of the school where, they could have been in contact with 6 feet or less for a minimum of 15 minutes cumulative, and we know that it's changed to cumulative. So, for example, like on that Thursday night, and sometimes you can have compounded cases, so there might be a case that breaks at Marathon at noon and then a case that breaks at the high school at 5, and if that happens, now you could have 70 phone calls to make in a given day.
Right.
And we would like to think that a phone call is super quick, like you call up and say, hi, I just want to let you know that your child's a close contact.
Yeah.
But you start to ask questions and families ask questions, and some of those calls can go as long as 15 or 20 minutes. So when we say we're making 70 calls, it can be super time-consuming. Because we want to shorten that process, we did just have a meeting with, our town partners. And so the Board of Health folks were there, and the town manager was there. And what we have decided is that because all of our school nurses are trained as contact tracers, if it's after the school day, so anytime really between, say, 3:30 and 6 o'clock the next morning, they can help us engage in some of that calling. So if there were 70 calls to be made and we had 7 people, each one of them making 10 calls is certainly better than having 2 people make 35 calls.
Right, okay,
So
great.
we are working on that, and thank you for asking that question, because it is nice for families to hear that we are being proactive and moving in the right direction.
Right, thank you, good.
Yes.
Yeah, good progress.
Thank you. Sure. No other questions? Okay. The chair report? So I'll start with community engagement. I think we've only received one email requesting a conversation about why the adults in the district are not required to have flu shots the way the students are. So that's something that we have to discuss. We did receive that, I think, today. We had office hours last night. Thank you to Joe and Leah, who manned the Zoom call, and I think we had one visitor, and we will continue to have office hours on a regular basis. They'll always be posted on the school calendar, which is in the district calendar, the town calendar. You can find it on the town website, and you can find it on EHOP's website. You can also find it on the school calendar website, the homepage of the school website. We did, to your point, Joe, we just did have the contact tracing meeting. Both Nancy and I attended on our as representatives of the school committee, and Carol's already covered it, but the exact question that you raised is what we were discussing, and as flu season is upon us and the cases are rising around us, how are we prepared for multiple cases potentially in a day and lots of contact tracing. So it was a really good conversation, and I'm just very grateful to the select board member who's there, as well as the town manager and the Board of Health members.
May I, again, so in addition to the solution that the superintendent mentioned, is the conversation ongoing? Because it sounds like that's all on the school side. We're adapting nurses' roles to do it. Does the town also feel they have enough resource?
Well, I think this is shared in, it's really more the town's sort of equation to solve, and I think the conversation was around when we look across the town, who are the right people? How can we get enough people in our reserve corps of contact tracers so that we know that we have enough to tap? Of course, Sean and Casey, as our Board of Health members, are always our first choice. They're great, and the school nurses. But beyond that, how do we build more of a reserve corps, and what kind of numbers would we need? So I think the idea is that we walked away from this meeting with the idea that there would be a sort of a calendar a schedule of sorts, where we know who's available on what regular days and in what order do we call those people in. So the town is actually working to figure out how those slots are filled. As Carol said, among those potential slot fillers are nurses. Our nurses did that all summer for us and starting last March, I believe.
Yes.
So they're well-versed in how to do contact tracing. But it was a great conversation to sort of share on the school side the trickle-down effect of late notification, what teachers have to go through to flip their learning delivery mode from in-person to remote, and families who have to stay home, and the consequences of not getting the contact tracing done on the district side are very high.
Right.
So we all recognize that on both sides, and I think it was a really good conversation, and both the select board member, the town manager, and the Board of Health, and Nancy and I were all in agreement that we'll just get together whenever. If Carol calls, we get together. So we're all on alert, basically, for any other conversations that need to happen.
Yes, and we agreed it wasn't just a school problem, it's really a community problem.
It is.
I think that's important. We have to always reemphasize that, right? It's a Board of Health issue, this contact tracing. That's ultimately their responsibility, so.
Yeah.
They're also identifying other people within the town that are not school people too.
Right. But I'm glad to hear that our message of the urgency on the school side is kind of getting through. You're working together to figure out how can we pool resource to do it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's true, we think of, well, if there's a case in Marathon and a case at the high school, there may also be a case in the Department of Public Works. And that all falls on the same Board of Health. So it's, we articulated what happens on the school side, and I think was well appreciated. So, next slide, please. In old business, I would like to report that in an executive session on October 1st, we voted to approve meeting minutes for the executive sessions held on July 19th, 2019, May 28th, 2020, June 4th, 2020, and August 15th, 2020. At that same executive session on October 1st, we voted not to release the minutes from July 19th, May 28th, and June 4th because the purpose of the executive session still exists. We did at that same executive session vote to release the 8/15/2020 minutes with redactions of portions of the minutes pertaining to negotiations of non-unit personnel because the purpose of the executive session for those portions of the minutes still exists. So that is for public record purposes. And as we'll talk about at the end of the meeting, I've signed several warrants, more bus refunds, Mr. Robinick. Warrant 21026 was the CARES Act warrant, 21027 bus refunds, 21028 and 21030 were operating and other expenses, and 21029, again, bus refunds, as well as 3 payroll warrants. One was a supplemental payroll, S2106S, as well as payroll warrants S21008 and S21009. Okay, and that's it for me. Right. Any questions? Liaison reports. Does anyone have a liaison report?
So I have gotten back in touch with the planning board, and they are planning for me, I guess, to give an update on monitor and plan for the potential impact of increased school enrollment across the district on November 30th, though I am going to chat with them because I just found out work wants me to fly out November 30th, so possibly earlier in November. And the Hopkinton Freedom Team is having a meeting next week, and it sounds like the hotline is actually up and may start being publicized very soon.
Oh, great.
Oh, that's great.
That's excellent. And who's that available to? Is it the whole town, or
Yeah,
just?
the hotline is going to be through the police department, and they will be monitoring it, and it will be for any sort of harassment-related type issues where the police should probably not get involved. because it's not violent or anything. And the Freedom Team will then hopefully help to mediate some of those situations. So that's the purpose of the hotline.
That's great. Anyone else?
Yeah, the Hopkinton Growth Study Committee met on Monday this week. Both Carol and I attended. As you'll recall, last year the Growth Study Committee did a lot of data collection and did some presentation of the data. And Jen Devlin was the school committee rep last year. And a side note, you'll be happy to hear Jen has been appointed as a community member to stay on the Growth Study Committee, so she does have a life after school committee, so we're happy to see her there. We were very interested, of course, on the school side and all that data that was collected on potential growth trends in Hopkinton. And the committee is equally interested in what we're seeing on the enrollment side. So Carol provides regular updates at that meeting on the enrollment. But we all kind of agreed that we're in a period where all that data collection was pre-COVID. TBD how it all plays out, so we're going to stay close to that. Well, just a reminder that that data's out there, and I'll see if I can get a link that you could more easily review it.
I'm wondering, actually, Lee, if you end up with a conflict, it sounds like maybe Joe would be a good stand-in for you at the planning board if you need a backup. I mean, if it's presenting growth and enrollment. I don't know, I'm just suggesting, it seems like those are topics between...
I'm happy to back you up if needed.
Okay.
But
Thank you. Any questions for Joe?
No, but I do have a liaison report of my own. The Turf Field Oversight Committee met last week and talked about there was some damage to the turf field on a seam that is covered by the warranty, so we have been pursuing that. Talked about aligning our policy with COVID policies. One thing we had expected to look at was tournaments, but tournaments are not going to be allowed in November, so that's really not an issue. We're having issues with sunflower seeds, people spitting them out of the field, and that's a real problem for cleaning up, and we talked about policies and enforcement of stopping that from happening, and also metal cleats is an issue, so it really was, things are moving along.
Okay. Thank you. Office hours, I think we have a date for our next one that will be posted, so is there any other discussion on office hours? Okay. All right, that brings us to new business. I think we have Mr. Cormier here, our athletic director, and we're going to talk about hosting the varsity girls hockey program in Hopkinton, I think.
We are.
Welcome. I'm sorry, we only have a small desk for you.
No mic, you'll have to speak up.
I'm usually loud. Well, thank you for having me. So I'll try to make this as quick as I can and try to answer any questions that you have. So for the past 10 years or so, any female student that we had here at Hopkinton interested in playing girls ice hockey participated as part of this co-op team. And Dover-Sherborne was the host school. So the MIA does allow cooperative teams when you do not have enough students to field your own team in a particular sport. So this was a great opportunity for us to provide ice hockey experience for our female students. Over the years, our numbers have grown, not to the extent that we could field our own team still, which hopefully one day we will be able to do, but to the point where we would now assume the role of host. What this basically means is now girls ice hockey we would run it and coordinate everything just like we do for the rest of our programs. So in terms of hiring coaches, scheduling buses, officials, athletic trainer coverage, all of these things. Which I know sounds like a lot, and you probably first thought is, well, this would probably crush us financially. But the way co-op teams are set up is that you divide the cost. So as in years past, we've been paying a fee per player to Dover-Sherborne. We now would receive that income from the schools that participate on our co-op team. So when we actually met to start discussing the budget, it looks like it's going to be a difference of about $300. So this is not a substantial cost whatsoever for us, and it allows us to still provide this opportunity for our female students. We have two other TDL schools that are part of this co-op, Dover, Sherborne, and Bellingham. And then last year, we had actually 3 additional schools added in, BVT, Nipmuc, and Tri-County. Actually, Tri-County's been part of it for a few years. And moving forward, it is just going to be the 3 Tri-Valley League schools, just based on numbers, need, and wanting to kind of keep it within the league in which we play in. So, in full disclosure, the girls who were on the team last year from BVT, Tri-County, and Nipmuc under MIA rules are grandfathered in. So those girls did not just lose the opportunity to play, they would still have the opportunity to stay as part of our team until they graduate.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cormier?
I do. So hockey, and I'm assuming all winter sports, is the MIA expecting to come out with additional guidelines pertaining, I know there've been some statewide issues with hockey and whatnot.
So I'll be happy to answer that. This is separate.
Gotcha.
So this would be something we'd be doing, assuming we have winter sports. So again, we do not, to answer your question, we do not have clear information yet on the winter season for any of our, planned winter activities. The board of directors actually from the MIA met today, and again, much like the rest of us, we're sort of in a holding pattern. The one decision that was made today was that there will be no winter state tournament. So if we do have a winter season for any of the sports that are able to have a season, there still would be no state tournament. So it would just be sort of local, regionalized league-type schedules. We were hoping around the beginning of November to receive new guidance from the EEA. Similar to what we did in the fall, the MIA would take that guidance and then sort of issue new guidance to schools on what is and what is not allowed. And then we would have to look as a school district on how that applies to us and what we can logistically offer.
Thank you.
It'll be another quick turnaround, much like the fall. The season is scheduled to start November 30th. But again, there's, especially with no state tournament, that on the one hand, obviously that's crushing. Kids have worked really, really hard to have that opportunity, but it does provide a little bit more flexibility when we're just trying to provide as many opportunities as we can.
Would you be anticipating, I know this is a this year question, but would you be anticipating adding assistant coaching that we don't currently have, like we had to do with some fall sports, and would that cost be shared as well if we have to do that?
So I think that would be a conversation, depending on what we're able to offer and what the guidelines are, but I think having an extra person is certainly something that I would recommend, particularly if we're still not going to use volunteer coaches, which is something we typically do, and I would think that would remain the same as it was in the fall. But that's something that once we have a better idea of what we're able to offer, what the numbers restrictions might be and the various protocols would be something I'd be able to come to everyone with, at a later time.
But as a principal, when you're in a collaborative like this, the principal would be to operate, whatever it costs to operate, the overhead would be divided among the members?
Oh, sorry, so you're talking specific to this?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, so this position, so there's been in existence a head coach and an assistant coach.
Okay.
So we would then sort of work that into ours, but again, that would be factored into the cost, and it really gets divided out per player, not necessarily per school.
Okay.
So, as the host, are there any additional considerations with having kids from other schools regularly interacting with our kids? Like, is it any different than sort of the fall sports that we've done, et cetera? So is there an added risk to being host in terms of COVID and exposure and things like that, as opposed to just cost?
The way I look at it is, I guess in general, anything we do is added risk. So yes would be the answer. But in terms of when we're competing with other towns, we're putting our students in exposure to other people to begin with. So whether or not they're on the same team or not, the key would be making sure that we follow all the safety protocols as we've done this fall with mask wearing and distancing. And, for instance, this fall we didn't allow any locker room use and those types of things to make sure that if there was a case, that the other team members are protected by taking those social distancing measures and mask wearing and all the other protocols that go into it. So each of these sports, if and when any of them are allowed to participate this winter, I'm assuming we'll have significant
Right,
modifications, much like the fall season.
Right, that's why I was asking about the difference between the sort of regular sport and the host idea, whether there was an added difference.
One of the nice pieces of taking on the host responsibilities is actually our 2 hockey programs will now be housed in the same location, whereas in the past few years, since Dover Sherborne was booking the ice and so forth, they were housed in Hopedale, whereas our boys are at New England Sports Center in Marlboro. So now we're actually planning to use the same rink, so it'd be nice to have both of our hockey programs in one location.
I love that girls are playing ice hockey. How many girls are on the team?
If everyone who played last year was to return this year, we'd have about 8 or 9. But one of the tough things with girls ice hockey is projecting incoming freshmen. Since there's no clearly defined youth program, it can be somewhat tricky to project the incoming freshmen. So that number does not include 9th graders.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you for being willing to host and provide the opportunity, because I do agree with Meg. I think a lot of young women really enjoy ice hockey. So the fact that we can do this, I think, is it's great of you to take it on, because I know that's extra work, but I think it'll be much appreciated by the girls who committed to. I know there's a lot of effort to launch this program a few years ago, and I'm sure they will be thrilled to know it can continue. I would like to entertain a motion from someone, if they'd be so interested, to approve the shift of host responsibility of girls varsity ice hockey to Hopkinton.
Sure, I move to accept the role of host for the girls' ice hockey co-op program.
Second.
Motion by Meg, second by Leah. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? And it passes. Thank you very much, and good luck to you as you navigate the rest of
If we have any
this.
more information on the winter season, we will certainly share that as soon as we can. I know families and students want to plan. I would like to plan as well. So as soon as we have that information, we will definitely disseminate it as quickly as we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich. Have a good night.
Okay, moving on, I think we are revisiting the capital plan with Dr. Kavanaugh.
Yes, so I know Mrs. Rodnick has her PowerPoint presentation. Before she actually gets started with that, one of the things that we thought would happen this evening is that you would see sort of the same presentation you saw last time, and we would be looking for a vote to approve the capital plan. After we had a budget meeting with Lauren DeBoe yesterday, you are going to see that in this capital plan, there will be a significant piece added to it, and I will let Mrs. Rodnick sort of take it from here, and we can answer all kinds of questions going forward, but, when I say significant, we mean significant, so.
That is true. So yes, here we are, just most of what we will see in the capital plan is the same. There have been a little bit of nuances, including one large change. So from this cover page, the HVAC district-wide is the same, boiler replacement is the same, roof replacement is the same, the vehicle system-wide security upgrades. There is a change to the system-wide technology upgrades. As I had mentioned in the last meeting, the town had stated that they were going to do the upgrade to the phone system now. So we have pulled that out, but that has been replaced with doing the firewall for the data center. So I'll get into that. So that has changed a little bit. The district-wide planning study, the White House exterior, the wetlands order of conditions are all as presented. The last one is what came about today, which is an addition to the marathon school. So going through again, the HVAC district-wide, this is to continue the process of putting controls, installing direct digital controls on 20 of the largest heating coils within the middle school. The boiler replacement is to replace 2 of these large boilers and replace them with 3 smaller ones. It is more cost efficient and more efficient to have the 3 smaller ones running rather than the 2 very large ones. And both the direct digital controls and this boiler replacement came from an engineering study that we did for the boilers. The roof replacements, these are the partial replacements at both the Hopkins School and the middle school. And again, these are areas of active roof failure. At the Hopkins School, the part to be replaced are the areas shaded in green. The part in blue was recently replaced in 2016, and the area in purple will be repaired. So that's at the Hopkins School. At the middle school, the area in green will be the area that would be replaced. The back small area in blue, that was recently redone with a storm, and that was replaced using insurance money. We had storm damage, and the roof needed to be fixed imminently. The other areas in blue are areas that are not part of the scope. This request is an addition for another vehicle for the maintenance staff. There are currently 3 trucks for 8 staff, and this became, again, it is an efficiency, the amount of times that we are using these trucks. As we're coming into the winter, you can understand what you need those trucks for in terms of plowing and sanding. But we also had a lot of moving as we were preparing the schools in trying to basically take furniture out and make them less crowded for students. The trucks became very important to the maintenance staff. System-wide security upgrades, again, this is that final year of installations throughout the district, and this came about through a security task force technology assessment plan that was done several years ago. So this has been a systematic installation following that security audit that was done. This is the one that has changed a little bit, the technology upgrades. Now this will represent the data center firewall and software and the Bell system. The Bell system we have been discussing. The firewall, of course, is for data security throughout the district. The district planning study is to utilize enrollment projections, the MSBA space guidelines, grade configurations, and discussion groups to determine a long-term strategy for enrollment growth in all the physical plants. The White House exterior renovation, again, is the roof, the siding, and the windows. The building now is being used for the 18 to 22 special education program and is office space both for building and grounds and transportation. The Wetlands order of conditions, this is an open order of conditions from when the high school fields were originally built. So the full cost is $100,000. There was an appropriation for $40,000. This remaining $60,000 will allow us to close this open order of condition. And this is the new request. So at this time, the Marathon School has already repurposed several rooms. As you recall, last year we opened a new preschool room and a new first grade room. So those have taken over both the health room and the art room. So those are now considered programs on a cart. The PLC room is now where we will see students for ESOL, and it's also where the teachers that are now on a cart is where they live, if you will. So we're both housing teachers and trying to service students in that room.
So, Ms. Rodman, could you just explain PLC room, just so people at home know what that stands for, or what that is?
Sure, I can do that. So when the Marathon Elementary School was built, we had a room for our professional learning communities, so teachers meet in small groups to, create curriculum, talk about instructional materials, look at student work, do inter-rater reliability activities, all of those things that make, our teaching and learning in Hopkinton excellent. So we've lost the space, but we continue the practice.
Thank you.
And next year, what we heard as part of the presentation is that the family resource room is slated to be used for instruction for FY22. In addition, they will also be looking to take office spaces and service students in there as well. So this project, construction, would add 4 classrooms at the end of the wing, 2 on each floor, with a stair tower. So as you can see, we're already being very creative with space. You can see we have teachers with desk areas within the storage file cabinet area. We have desks that are out in the hallway. In here you can see 3 teacher desks and basically a learning space out also in the stairwell and in the hallway. So we're quickly using up every little nook and cranny that there is within the building.
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly about this, so, some of this, to be very fair, some of this can be COVID-related, part of the dedensification process, but some of these spaces, we were, in these predicaments before there ever was COVID.
And one question, the request right now is for the 4 spaces, is that for current volume of students in Marathon, or is that projecting for more student growth?
Essentially what we're thinking is that the kids that will be going into those classrooms are already here. We've already lost 2 classrooms, so to speak, within that building, and, Mrs. Rodman can continue, and you'll get to see some of the numbers, and admittedly, the numbers for next year they're really unpredictable.
Right.
These are permanent classrooms we're discussing, not temporary.
That's correct. This is permanent construction. And to your point, when they did the construction for Marathon, as you recall with the community, originally the plan was for 22 classrooms, and just prior to construction, they added in 4 additional classrooms to get to 26. So we're already at 27 with the addition of the first grade classroom, and then 28 with the addition of preschool. So it was built with 26 classrooms, we've already got 28, hence the displacement of both the art and the health room. And then for next year, we're slated to need another instructional space. So to your question, it is for students that are already here.
Can you get to the enrollment numbers exactly, though, too?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So as you can see, when they did the construction, there were 2 areas that were identified as potential where additional classrooms could be added. On my left side, the arrow, this is where you can do that 4-classroom addition, which is the end of the wing. This arrow at the top, which is walking out towards the playground area, is another area that had been identified where you could do a 2-classroom, one over the other stack. What we are talking about is a 4-classroom, 2 over 2 at the end of this wing. So again, you can see this area in red is what was identified as where you could add those classrooms, including the stair tower. And just for the community and for the committee, what we have done this year at the Elmwood School, we've added 4 classrooms, 3,600 square feet of learning space. Hopkins, the same, 4 classrooms, 3,600 square feet of learning space. And at the high school, 6 classrooms, 7,740 of square feet. And again, that does include some storage space, so that is not all dedicated learning space. So the request for Marathon is 4 classrooms at 4,300 square feet. And this is a little bit larger than the 4 classrooms for Elmwood and Hopkins because the K classrooms include an area for toilets.
And would 2 of those be kindergarten classrooms?
Correct.
Okay.
So a kindergarten classroom is roughly around 1,200 square feet, whereas a first grade is around 950.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really important to underscore is, for next year, Mrs. DeBoe is looking to take the Family Resource Center, and that really is that one sort of space left for teachers and their professional learning and building-based meetings and those sorts of things. So to lose that space is really to lose the one space where teachers can gather as a faculty.
Well, these numbers already I can see. I mean, when we built, as you know, you were there the whole way through, it was somewhere around, as you recall, the state really didn't want us to overbuild, and we showed them all the data and our projections, but it is what it is. But the good news is, it was designed to accommodate additional classrooms.
Correct.
That design work's already been done in exactly the spots you indicated. But the state gave us their enrollment certification of somewhere, wasn't it somewhere around 400?
It was less than 400.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that doesn't mean capacity. So we built it for a capacity that would be doable up to around 500 or something. And a lot of the spaces we're talking about, we knew we could use at least temporarily if there were a spike in enrollment over a couple-year period. But if we think that the years go on and the evidence is apparent that it's not just a temporary spike, then we would need to use that additional allocated expansion space. And that's where we are.
That is where we are. And, again, to your question about building this for the students that are here, if this were to pass at Maytown meeting, you are still talking about, from July 1, a good 18 to 20 months of building time. So you will not have the students in there for FY22. You will lose that resource room for next year. But, moving forward, we need to start really thinking proactively about the students that are here and looking at the projections. It is not a blip, it is not going down. And you can see where our kindergarten enrollment size is compared to history. We're at our highest kindergarten enrollment in the last 10 years.
And so this is this current year, even for students who may have deferred kindergarten.
That's correct.
And so forth, so we're still above last year.
Right, and that's why we say these numbers are very tentative, because we know that we have kindergarten families right now that are, we call that red shirting, right? They haven't enrolled their students, they haven't registered their students. And I think that happens in a year like this because they're looking at a hybrid model and they're thinking, I will just, defer to next year. And it's hard to say whether they would go to first grade or kindergarten, but either way, they will be in the Marathon Elementary School. We've had families leave us to go to private schools, and we have had families leave us, you've seen the homeschooling numbers as well, and there are quite a few KM1s that have decided to do homeschooling because of this year. So the number, even though we have 270 enrolled in our kindergarten right now, it's really hard to say what KM1 will look like next year. But 270, you can see, is the largest number we've had, and those are all October 1st SIMS numbers.
So, yeah, the reason for my question is I worry that we're constantly playing catch-up, right? And so I would love to see kind of ideal projections for what should we be building out, what should we be planning for in the next couple years, so that ahead of time we can be like, okay, 4 empty classrooms that will definitely be filled the year we make them, but at least at this point we're planning ahead. And I know that you're already doing some of that work, but I just...
Do you have the projections that were estimates from the capacity planning work last year that would take us forward? I know they're just estimates, but I'm just curious, if those had come true, if we hadn't had a pandemic, if we had realized the growth that was projected by the consultant last year, do you know what that would have looked like? I'm only asking because I know there's vague data out there about what parents of kindergartners across the country decided to do with their students this year. And, it's hard to know. We don't really have a good way of knowing what percentage of families held their kids. So I've read a couple of articles that estimated maybe even 17% may have held their kids. I think it's very high, but there are a lot of studies right now, and it does raise the question of, even, regardless of this project, because it won't be in place next year, we are going to have a crunch probably in our kindergartners with the held kindergartners plus the growth of, the naturally occurring kindergarten class. But I don't know what the held number might look like. Maybe the projections could help us.
I have that. Do you want me to put it on the screen? Yep.
You guys are seamless.
Yeah, well, I had it open earlier so I could put the actuals in.
So this year we were projected to be 275.
So we're probably over what was projected then. Because if you add back in kids who either homeschooled, went to private school, or redshirted, so to speak, their kindergartner, it's probably more than 5.
If those students come back, you will definitely exceed 275 students.
And in the next, 10 years, that doesn't go down really. There's a little bit of a blip in 22, 23. Again, these are just projections, but with these projections, we don't anticipate in the next 10 years going below 275, or 270, where we are now.
Right.
Okay.
One thing I think, Joe, that you said that was very interesting is it was built for 400 students, but that was not a limit. But if we push out 10 years and we look at the 281 and the 313, you're at 600 students, and then we typically have about 80 kids in pre-K. So we're talking about 680 students.
Yeah, that's more than the school that we built,
Yeah.
for sure, absolutely, I'm not arguing that, yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky process when you have the co-funding through the MSBA, right? Not only would they not allow us to build the school the size that we wanted, but they wouldn't let us add on to it larger than they thought it should be with our own funding either. I guess just the other context for the community would be financially. The Marathon School project amount spent after all was said and done was close to $4 million under the amount that town meeting in total allocated for the project. So this amount is within that margin.
It's a good point.
And that was a substantial amount under, and it had to do with a lot of factors, but even the, what was it, 1.5 or 2.5 we got from town meeting in January 2017 for the additional 4 classrooms during construction, we ended up not having to use that amount. We came out more under than that.
Correct.
So,
Did you finish your slides? I'm sorry, we derailed your slides with other questions. No,
I can take my
but,
slide.
again, a lot of the spaces we talked about, the professional learning center, the filling resource center, we knew were kind of a workaround to the limitations in size that the state imposed, and but we would want that intention to be that would be a permanent situation. Those could be used temporarily, but what we're seeing is a more permanent trend. Although the projection numbers are all pre-COVID, we don't really know. You never really know.
Right. And actually, my last slide was just if you had questions.
So the one thing that jumped out, or a number of things, but one of the things that jumped out from your slides was looking at the amount of space we've added at all of the schools except for the middle school, and then kind of mentally looking at the slide that Carol put up. I know I'm assuming you have not done the middle school meeting with their budget yet, but are we potentially looking at a problem with the middle school in not that long of a time with space there?
When you look at the enrollment and kind of that design enrollment, we are still within those parameters. So we're not in that big of a crunch at the middle school yet, as of currently.
We got some space back, I remember, a year or two ago.
a few years ago when the preschool.
Preschool, but wasn't there a class there? Well, there was a tech program that was in there that was occupying some spaces, so yes, that is correct. We have taken some spaces back. There were some spaces that were not being utilized. I can't remember what they called that room right off the office. The lecture hall is now, so we are gaining spaces and making them usable spaces, and so the middle school is not terrible right now.
Yeah, I know.
The thing that, thank you so much for bringing this to us. I think we need to have this conversation, obviously, and keep this conversation going. The thing that, well, first of all, for the committee's edification, we do not need to vote this tonight, right? We can vote the capital plan at our next meeting. So I think originally we were thinking we'd vote it tonight, not knowing that content would change. So don't feel we're not going to do that tonight. So this is just discussion. The thing that jumps out at me is sort of to Nancy's point and to Leah's point is we are looking to do an $80,000 campus planning initiative. And I know that a lot of these questions, I still have sort of in my mind the color-coded diagrams from the consultant last year who color-coded the different aspects of the middle school in Hopkins in red if we were below design optimums for the projected enrollment and so forth. So I know that there are needs, we all know there are needs in Elmwood, the middle school, coming down as we want to be ahead of the curve, to Leah's point, about those enrollment projections. So, my hesitation is, when we look at everything in its entirety, is this what we need to do next? And can we wait till the capacity study is done, the campus planning study is done, which would defer, so it would be 2 years of crunch, probably. Like if we wait a year, then it's going to be 20 months to build and whatnot. So it could be 2 years of crunch for a marathon, which I know would be difficult. But that would give us marathon the context of all the schools, which may change our opinion about where our resources have to be spent first. So that's my only hesitation. I definitely see the need. It's just hard out of context because we're only looking at the one need at the moment. So
the only challenge with that, when you think of it K to 12, and you're right, we do need a long term, K1 within that will probably not change.
Yeah.
2 to 12, there is discussion about what does that look like.
Yeah.
So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. Are you going to pull first grade out? Are you going to, you know what I mean? So, but 2nd through 12, you have opportunities to think of that a little bit differently. K1 may always stay your early learning center.
Yeah. It's just a question of, who's the most crunched. Is it Marathon more crunched than Elmwood or the middle school? It's hard to know. But clearly there's a need, and I am very nervous. There's really absolutely nothing we can do almost between now and next year, but I am nervous about what our true kindergarten numbers are going to look like next year. I do think that's, just like, we were talking, colleges are looking at what are their freshman class admissions going to look like, because again, people kind of deferred at these sort of entry points to systems, and we know there will be deferrals, and very likely if it were projected at 275 this year or 2 whatever next year, it's probably going to be that plus whatever percentage, held back. So I am nervous. This won't help them next year, but what questions do you guys have? One other question, I know this is more of a plan than a funding. If we were to look at, this is a capacity issue, if we were to look at splitting some funding with some of our HCA money, we have money designed for one-time investment. If we sort of split, what would that look like in terms of would it still go on? Obviously, if we split, it goes on as a capital project still, because that portion has to be budgeted in the capital plan.
you're still using a stabilization, so it would still be capital, and it would still be it would still need all those votes.
So even if we somehow paid entirely out of our HCA, it still would go on our capital planning, and we would still submit it to the capital review committee?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question for Susan. I know the answer's probably no, but maybe it would be great if we just do a rigorous double check on it. Because we were close to $4 million, we spent close to $4 million less on the money that town meeting appropriated through the articles, collective of the articles for the marathon school. And knowing that we designed in the total of 8 additional classrooms into that amount that was funded for design and construction that town meeting approved, would you be able to just kind of give a rigorous double check on whether the already approved articles for funding marathon school could be used? I'm imagining that the MSBA involvement could be a complicating factor to those articles being used for this, but maybe not. And maybe if you review with the town finance director, there might be some discoveries.
Yeah, it would be a conversation with the town and legal counsel as well.
Okay.
As to what exactly that vote would then be carried forward and used for.
Right.
So, but it certainly is a very good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So we will see you next time for more discussion on this, and I encourage everybody, both among us and in the community, if you have questions on this project, please send them to Dr. Kavanaugh or to us, and we'll forward them on, because obviously this is a shift. Okay. Thank you. I think, Ms. Parson, we have a grant presentation. Oh, this is so much more fun. Grant side is so much more fun.
People spend money.
So happy.
Although it is happy to talk about, like, next year and the potential that school would be more.
I know. More kids, that's good.
Right.
Back to normal.
Well, thank you for the time to talk a little bit about some of the grants that come into the public schools of Hopkinton. And some of this should be relatively self-explanatory in terms of the benefits of grants, but I thought it was worth mentioning. We all know working in a public organization, we have a limited pot of funds that we draw from, yet the needs and the wants that we have in terms of doing the best for our students will often exceed the amount of money that we have budgeted. And sometimes the creativity of our faculty and things like that also exceed what we are able to budget, and that's where grants really come into play. They help us stretch the operating budget and pursue things that we wouldn't normally have been able to. They also, in some cases that I'll speak to a little bit, promote this nice culture of collaboration between and within our schools. And some of the things that I'll speak to a little bit tonight talk about some grants that really have been a partnership and fostered some teamwork and collaboration, which is really critical, especially in our district where we know our children move so frequently, and each of our individual buildings focus on such a discrete cohort of students. So, when I first got here, I didn't realize how much of this position actually entailed grant writing, and although I should have known when Carol invited me to a Department of Ed grant writing workshop before I even started here, that was very telling. So there are 4 grants that typically do come into the town of Hopkinton, and the financial allocation is not something that we request. We are told from the Department of Education how much of these federal funds have been allocated to the town of Hopkinton, and then it's our job to decide how we're going to use the funds. So Title I is a grant that is really designed to meet the needs of some of our perhaps more economically challenged students, or some of our students who have specific learning challenges and where we need to provide some additional supports. And Title I is actually awarded based on the level of financial need in your community. So there have been years where Hopkinton's Public Schools has not been awarded the Title I grant. Sometimes we get a little notice partway through the winter or towards the late spring saying, these districts in Massachusetts, you may be losing your Title I funding. But so far, at least for the 3 years that I've been here, we have received the Title I funding, which is incredibly helpful. Title II is really designed for professional development and improving educator quality, and I'll get into in an upcoming slide some of the uses that we've designated for each of the grants. Title III is truly allocated to support our English language learners and supports academic needs for those students. And Title IV Title IV is the one that I feel like we have the most flexibility with. When you talk about a well-rounded education, that could be professional development, it could be providing support specifically for students, curriculum technology. It's kind of a catch-all for lots of things that don't necessarily fit into one of the other categories, but we still find to be a need. So this year, not only do we have the title grants, but we also have grants that are federally funded as well that were specific to the pandemic. The first grant is the ESSER grant, and that was a flat dollar amount, and the way that was calculated was based on the amount of funding we received for Title I. So again, that wasn't something that we said, oh, we want this, we'd like to apply for this amount of money. They just said, this is what you're getting. And a wide range of uses for that grant are available, but essentially you have to be able to prove that your purchases or uses of that money are related to the pandemic. The CVRF grant is certainly the largest of all of the grants that I'm speaking of tonight, and that comes in at a per enrolled student numeric amount. And that grant, also of all the grants that I'm speaking about tonight, has the most succinct timeline, and that grant expires at the end of December, this December. So while it opened up, midsummer, and it's certainly a substantial amount of money, you have to be able to spend that amount of money by December 30th. So because of that, there are some constraints. So it's not like we can say, oh, we need additional nurses, or we need additional maintenance or custodian. Those are things we thought of at first, but quickly realized that unless you can supplement that for the second half of the year, we have to look for other ways of spending that. And so that's been, I'd say, a substantial amount of conversations that we've had around the table this fall in terms of what do we need that grant to supply for us and to support us with. So these are some of the examples of how we actually spend the funding for both of these types of grants. And these examples are really put up here in generalities, and each year the way that we spend the money could change. So curriculum software, tutoring opportunities. This year we spent a lot of money on building curriculum that is designed to really fit in with the new learning models that we have working right now. Kind of closing some of the learning gaps for students. Historically, in one way, sometimes you have to amend and change what you originally thought you would use the grant for. So where we might have thought, oh, we're going to bring in a number of subs, and we're going to cover our teachers so our teachers can get together and grade level teams or department level teams, and substitutes can be funded out of this to give teachers the time to do that. We're not bringing our teachers out during the school day to do that this year. So, we'll probably end up going back into some of these grants and changing them to make them more applicable to what it is that we need. So other grants that we've received over the past couple of years that are not those kind of natural, here we are, we're handing money to you kinds of grants. The Career Vocational Technical Education Grant, CVTE, we talked about that around the school committee table a few times already. I know Carla Crisafulli came in last year, and Evan, and we talked a little bit about this. So last year we received two what DESE calls planning grants, and each of those grants came in at about $15,000. And the types of things that they allowed us to do was really begin the planning process, as I think you might remember, for, how do we acclimate students to the workforce in the 21st century? What's the job market like? How can we bring some professional knowledge to our guidance counselors about the current job market? Types of job shadowing experiences for students, industry credentials that a student can walk out of Hopkinton High School and say, hey, I have an industry-recognized certificate in Adobe Photoshop, for example. So the first year, the 2 grants that were funded really helped us to kind of lay the foundation for the work that we would hope to continue moving forward. And that also included that School to Career Guide that a couple of teachers worked together on, including Mary Beth Tremblay at Hopkins School and Carla Crisafulli at the high school, Jess Bacon at the high school, and Dr. Zaleski, really kind of putting together this document that would be of value to students who were going into the workforce directly following high school. This year, as a follow-up to the planning grants, we were awarded an implementation grant from DESE, and that's at significantly more money than we've received over the past couple of years, because now we're actually hoping to implement something. And, in full disclosure, as with everything else right now, some of this is being shifted, and we have to come up with some workarounds and things like that. But the core of this, for the most part, is still existing in the way that we had imagined. So we have a number of coordinators up there who will really be working on our work studies and our internships, and we do have some students who are participating in those. We're still planning to offer dual enrollment opportunities. We've decided to kind of hold those off until the second semester because the high school really felt like it was important to maintain our students at Hopkinton High School with the Hopkinton High School kind of oversight for the beginning of the year. We're offering an Adobe Photoshop course that students are enrolled in right now. Sterling Morrell is teaching that at the high school, and students, part of this grant paid for the tests that the students will take, the materials for the course, and hopefully they'll walk out with something that'll be really valuable to them. We have some work that's being developed in terms of a financial literacy curriculum at the high school. We're digging into some of the data that we have with Naviance, making sure that we really understand all of the reports that it offers in terms of, again, helping our high school staff really guide our students as they're trying to make decisions about their future. So that's where we are with that for this year. One of the things that we've just been talking about is the job shadow. And I don't know if you remember that from last year, but that was an opportunity that took place for students during the February wasn't happening. The February vacation week, and Valerie Lachansky oversaw that, and she made some really great connections with some local businesses, and so she is coming back to join us this year, and we'll be talking about what job shadowing will look like in a Zoom world. But, we're still really committed to maintaining the momentum that's been started at the high school. This is a grant that Carol actually came across last year for the district, and again, this was a very substantial grant, and I think we've talked about this a little bit here as well. We had high hopes of a lot of professional development and sending people to all kinds of really exciting courses and workshops last spring, and we had to do an almost immediate about-face with plans that had just been put into the works. And instead, the shift that we made, I think, is certainly very valuable to us and perhaps even more sustainable than the original plan. And that involves a lot of curricular materials at all levels, the interactive read-alouds, elementary all the way through 6th grade. A lot of novels were purchased for the middle school and the high school English department, really thinking about our devotion to multicultural perspectives and, growing our opportunities for students to see themselves in some of the literature that we're offering. We've made some purchases out of this for our English language education department, and that's a department that, with the numbers of students that are growing really rapidly, I feel like in some ways we are really playing catch-up with just right materials for those students, and this provided us some nice funding for that. And there was also a nice collection of books that was purchased really under the direction of Ann Van Bennick and Alan Keller at the middle school, addressing cultural proficiency. And those books ranged from titles that we would potentially be using with students, but that the faculty wanted to read and vet ahead of time, to more adult titles, like Fragility is an example, that they wanted to start having available for book groups. And I think Ann Van Bennick actually ran, you might have attended one of them, Carol, a book
Club over the summer.
Yes, over the summer. So I think we did a nice job of connecting that grant to our needs. And these two opportunities, while they didn't bring specific funds into the district, they certainly are valuable in terms of the benefit that we're getting for some really rich programming that we probably wouldn't have been able to afford through our operating budget. So PBIS is a connection between the Mass Department of Ed and UConn, and we have 14 of our elementary educators and 5 administrators working together with the basic expectation of building school-wide expectation, clarity of the way that we communicate amongst our school population. And one of the nice things with the PBIS training, like pretty much all of the trainings that we see coming our way right now, is that they are kind of marrying their work through a lens of equity. So it's not just talking about when we walk in the hallway, this is how we're all going to walk together, but they're incorporating within their curriculum, how we really look at all of our students and all of their different backgrounds and where they're coming from, and trying to really create a positive, smoothly running school culture and climate. So that is a 3-year academy, and we are currently in year 2 of that. And the other opportunity that is similar in nature, that we've been able to sign on, is with a company called Black Print Consulting, and we may have talked about them a little bit here, but we have 12 members of our leadership team, and that's not only administrators, but that includes teachers and a social worker from the high school. So lots of different types of positions are represented there, and again, that's working with our growth in terms of anti-bias, culturally responsive practices. And that's also a multi-year academy that we will be involved in terms of growing our own knowledge. And that's really,
Before you ask questions, I just want to say that Jen is a phenomenal grant writer. Like the CBTE grant, when she first suggested writing that, I thought, oh my gosh, what are the changes Hopkinson's going to get? And now she's sustained that for several years and really bringing programs to this school that would have been unheard of otherwise. So really, she's doing an amazing job.
That must have been a great workshop you took her to. That's great, really, I'm impressed with all the amounts. And how fortunate our faculty and students are to have all that extra stuff.
Yeah.
With that $225 per student, is that what Susan's been talking about as the CARES Act money, or is that different? That's the same, okay, thanks.
I know those grants take a lot of time to research and to write, and it really is a skill, so I applaud all of your efforts and great success in getting those for our kids.
Well, thank you. Each of the grants that we have from DESE, you get your own liaison. So I'm on definitely a first-name basis with our grant liaisons with all kinds of questions, and it's nice to have your own helper people to walk you through, because there are a lot of, you can't just slap it on a piece of paper and send it in. There are a lot of processes. I'm sure you're well versed in that, but thank you.
It's amazing, and I just think it speaks, as just the work of Ms. Rothernick, to our commitment to finding all available resources to make this district run. And we're not, taking it for granted that we have very supportive taxpayers, which we do, but we're trying to support these critical programs with grant money, and so much of your time must go to this. It is unbelievable, all this work. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to share it as well.
It's interesting to kind of see the range of things you've applied for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, Now we're moving into policy. This is good. And I just want to say, I don't know if you policy working group people ever get a week off. You have been so busy, and just, between Meg and Leah and Dr. Kavanaugh, I know you must be meeting at least weekly, if not more often, to churn out so many important policy changes. So here we are. I think we're reading ACAB for a third reading. It's our harassment policy. Dr. Kavanaugh?
Sure. I don't really have too much to say about ACAB. I know we had talked last time about adding the word ability to kind of pair up with the disability, and so we have done that in I think, two places that it appears in this policy. The policy working group did not review this one a third time in sort of our off couple of weeks. But I don't think that we have heard anything from anyone in the community, and I don't know that there was anything else that you had asked of us to take a look at in that policy.
I believe it was the ability, and I think, if I recall correctly, I think that we just didn't have the right copy in our packet last time. I think you'd already made the change, and we just didn't have it to review. Is there a recommendation from the policy working group at this point about what you'd like us to do? Or you think we're ready for a vote on this?
I think we're ready for a vote on this one. This is very comprehensive and thoughtful, so... What do you think, Leah?
Yeah, I think we're ready for that.
One of the things I think we talked about with this was also creating a form for filing, but as you know, the committee doesn't have to approve the forms, so that is something that I'm happy to work on with Kim Polnick, our HR director. I think there's been a number of forms over time, and she'll tell me, these are some of my favorites, these are some of my least favorites, so we can certainly work on that, and then, of course, the policy subcommittee, we'll take a look at it.
Great.
And then that form can be added to the procedure. Yeah, at the bottom, the reference.
I think that it's reasonable for us to take a vote. I think we haven't heard any more from the community, and you've been very thorough in your attention to the detail. I think it looks good.
So you're looking for a
I'm
motion?
looking for a motion, please, to approve policy ACAB as written.
I move to accept policy ACAB as written.
Motion by Nancy.
I'd prefer somebody from the policy committee either make the motion or second it.
Being very polite.
No, I wasn't sure if I should be making the motion.
My tongue. Yeah, I'll second it.
Second by Meg. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So it passes unanimously. Thank you very much for that. We now have, I believe, policy IHBHE, tickles right off the tongue. Virtual education has changed its name, I think.
Yes.
It has changed its name for yet a third time, and I think technically this is its third reading, but I think we called it a first reading last time because of the change of name. And so this time, because it had been lettered or coded with IHBHE, we left it as a second reading. I think we spent most of our time on this policy, a good 90 minutes the last time that we met, and we have changed this to virtual education.
Great.
I know we had started with live streaming, and we moved to teleeducation, and then I think we preferred virtual education because we felt like that was the term that best captured what we were doing. We talked an awful lot about what we really meant by things like live streaming, and did our definition of live streaming, the way we're using it as sort of an educational tool in the district, did it really match what a sort of Webster's dictionary definition of live streaming? And, there was, discord, I think, between those two things. So anyway, we arrived at virtual education. We did leave in the definitions of asynchronous, live streaming, synchronous, and video conferencing because we do refer to those terms at times. And I think that we, as a district, talk about live streaming and video conferencing. So what we did do in the second section of this, under virtual education rules and responsibilities, we talk about, we broke it into categories of privacy, student family requirements, educator requirements, intellectual property of teacher or student, and then finally, letter E is district requirements. So that, it really has, I think, undergone a pretty big shift structurally and, I think, in terms of language.
We received some wonderful recommendations from an outside member that helped us order our thoughts. Thank you very much. I won't mention her name, but we all know who it is. So, thanks, Amanda. We were thinking about that definition section, which I think we agreed to keep on. At the same time, I feel like as the weeks pass, we're all growing more and more accustomed to the lingo of live streaming and teleeducation, and so at one point I thought perhaps we don't even need those definitions anymore because they're so part of the common lingo. But maybe that's only because I've been on the policy committee working on them. So I just wanted to hear what you thought, who, haven't been as wedded to these syllables as we have.
I don't know, I think it never hurts to be explicit in defining terminology that could be ambiguous. If you're a non-native English speaker, if you are new to education or new to United States education, this stuff, I think it doesn't hurt to define it. I mean, also if you use it in a business context, it may take on a little bit of a different flavor, and so if it's meaningful to us in a certain way, I think it's worth saying.
Right.
If somebody, the way you've broken it, if somebody doesn't want to take the time to, wrestle with the definitions, they can just go to the application of it below. So it doesn't bother me.
Okay.
Personally, I don't know how Nancy or Joe you feel.
This is my favorite version.
It gets better each time.
We did, one thing just randomly, there was a part here about not having like pets or something in the room, and we sat down and we were like, you know what, actually, like when a kid has anxiety, when, the teacher having a pet on their lap or whatever, maybe something that relaxes a child, the child may feel comfortable being able to have their pet. So we were like, I understood the whole idea of a loud pet and barking and things like that, but we didn't want to remove all pets from the picture because you could see it as a good instructional tool and a good way to relax a child. So we took that out, I think.
I had a question. Do you have more? Sorry. Did you have something else? I had a question about the intellectual property of the teacher and student part, and it was really about the student's intellectual property rights. Again, I was trying to think across different ways that this might be used, and I was thinking about that robotics team, potentially, or a science fair team, or literary magazine or whatever. I think it mentions that the materials may be the property of the district and or the individual teacher. They may also be the property of the student. And I think we put that in the title, but we didn't actually put it in the meat. And I would kind of like to see us making sure that we also protect the students' intellectual property rights.
So would you suggest just adding the phrase,
and or the student?
Maybe the property of the district, the individual teacher, and the student?
Yeah.
And or.
And then I don't know if these materials are for student or are for the intended use.
I wonder what the other purposes might be.
I know, right? I don't know, it's on one hand you think, what intellectual property do kids have? But kids do some really amazing things, and they get published, and they, apply for patents, and they do things that, I never thought of doing when I was in K-12 education, but I do want to make sure that we protect.
Yeah, and students, I hate to say this, sometimes take that material from their teachers and sell it online. So I think this is protective, too, of the teacher and the work that they've done.
That last sentence is, it's for the current student's use, not for anybody else's.
Last time we read this, I gave some input that sometimes when I read these policies, it looks like they're written by a lawyer who's trying to protect the district. And I wanted to make sure, especially in virtual education, that just the tone of it talks more about like the opportunities and rights for students in virtual education. Did we feel we made any progress in that regard? Yeah, I like Amanda's point about the rights of intellectual property from the student point of view too. But as a parent, you get inundated with these, rule manuals. You got to sign this, agree to all the rules and behaviors of the school district. Here's this policy, do this, do this. If you fail to do this, you will have these consequences. And I know we're here to protect the district, for sure. But if there's a way to write these in a way that doesn't cause unnecessary additional stress, like I like the idea, why bother putting pet in there? You don't have to make it a penalizing environment, so I'm glad you didn't exclude a pet from being in the room, for example. Things like that help.
Did you see anywhere in particular where you thought we should?
No, I just wanted to know if it was addressed, that's all. And it still reads a little...
Well, I think policies generally do not exude human warmth.
Yeah.
And we don't turn to them on a cold winter's eve to find a soul companion.
Okay, no, I didn't say that.
But I would say that your present policy committee is a pretty sentimental lot, quite heartfelt. And if we found this too much like the police, we would not have any of that, Joe. I just want you to know that love went into the composition of this. Is that a reassurance?
I'm reassured that we have the same objective. That's great.
So what you want to see is how the student benefits from this
I want to see the rights of the student, what they can do when they're participating in live stream, what access they can have to the classroom, things like that, how far away in the room can they walk, things like that. Not, they must be this, they must be in front of the screen, no one else must be there, the teacher has the right to do this, things like that. I want to see what the student has a right to do. So I might want to hold it back one more reading.
No, I think you should have a third reading anyway.
Yeah, if that feedback wasn't incorporated, I'd like to take a closer look again.
It's very hard because it's that conditional verb, isn't it? Must. Students must be.
How about, even if it's like teachers must, just for the benefit of the student, for example. A lot of it seems centered on the other...
Educator requirements.
With the educators, we say will be. They will be dressed.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we have, before we get to the must language, if we have a quick statement, like I'm just looking at privacy.
Yeah.
The first sentence is the must. To Joe's point, maybe if we state the intent, like students, all participants in virtual education participate with the expectation of privacy. Like we guarantee privacy or something, sort of the good statement of intent, and then we follow with the enforcement, like how that is guaranteed. I don't know, it's just a thought. I haven't looked at it like that, but I will if that's something that you think is helpful.
I'd gladly revisit this.
Okay.
Because I'm kind of reading aloud to myself, students will treat each other with respect instead of must. I like that.
I think we tend to turn, to your point, to policy when we need guidance on, how to do things in a way that is endorsed by the district and sort of legal. So it does tend to sound like legal parameters, because it is, really. But there's probably something we can do with, again, our intention, and then the statement of what delivers that intention. So we'll bring this back, and I would ask the non-policy committee members, myself included, to do some of the lifting
Yeah.
for the policy committee folks, and take a couple of, takes an hour or two and or whatever, and go through this with whatever thoughts, Joe's thoughts, or other thoughts we may have. And to the community, if you have any additional thoughts, I'm personally hoping that we can adopt it at the next meeting, only because I believe there are probably coaches or teachers or whomever who may want to be using or who may be using this technology, and it would be nice to have this in place to protect everybody. So I'm hoping we can adopt it, but I do think it needs another reading.
Yes, I've taken copious notes.
All right. We're a little behind, so moving right along, we'll go to policy BDA. I think we had overlooked a public comment that was rightly, I think, asking a question about the word citizenry, and so Dr. Kavanaugh or committee, how did you guys?
Sure. So you actually voted on this last time, and it was approved.
We did, yeah.
But you are correct that we had overlooked that. So the one revision that we made, we eliminated the word citizenry, and we substituted it with residents. That's the only change to this policy.
Yeah, we did Google it and spend some time with the word and realize that, yes, it does have the context of citizen.
I think that's great.
Can I make a motion to accept the revision?
Please do.
That's what I've done.
Motion by Meg.
Second.
Second by Leah. All in favor of accepting this as revised? Aye. And all opposed? No, so it passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and I'm hoping that, our intent was always to be inclusive. I'm hoping that the community understands that the word was overlooked, and I think any language that includes inclusivity is great. That brings us to our second public comment. I haven't checked, we've been getting emails by 5, so. Future agenda items. Does anyone have a future agenda item they want to raise?
Yes, I thought I heard raised previously, and maybe it was missed, but the idea of discussing later start times for high schools and possibly middle school. I don't know what the age range for the research is, but just having a discussion about those later start times. A lot of school districts in the vicinity have started doing things like that, so it would be nice to have that conversation.
Yes, and I think Meg brought that up last time, and we did talk about that, and I think we were recognizing what's going on right now and putting that off a little bit this year, but a little bit later to have that discussion while the high school, where it largely is, it will impact, can sort of settle into a routine, and if we have to have a discussion about how to move forward, we're going to just put that off for a couple of meetings, but it's on the list.
Okay.
It has been heard, it's on the list.
I have two, Amanda. One, we had a thoughtful letter from a parent inquiring about the flu vaccine policy for the district and whether it applies to students equally as to teachers. And I don't know if that would require a separate agenda topic, but it might be worth discussing. Or getting an update, perhaps, might be the way to do it.
Yep.
And the second was, back over the summer, we had discussed having someone come in and give kind of historical background on, Hopkinton history that might help us put racial issues in perspective and have a greater understanding of our community's history. And Chuck Joseph, who's a local business person and former teacher and history buff locally too, has offered to do that, but we just need to give him some time slots and see when he's available.
Great. If you want to find out sort of how much time he needs, and we can get him on the agenda.
Okay, and I'll give him the next several meeting dates as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to look as budget presentations start to crop up.
Exactly.
I'm not sure. I don't know what those are going to look like, when that is going to hit, but soon. So it'll either be before those hit, or it'll probably be January.
Okay.
Is my guess. So I'm not sure, but if we can find out how much time, like maybe 15 minutes, half an hour, what he needs, that would be good.
He gives great presentations.
Yeah.
Any others? Okay. All right, that brings us to the consent agenda, items by consent.
Okay, as superintendent, I recommend that the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda. So moved.
Motion by Nancy. Second. Second by Leah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passes as well. Now we need a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Motion by Meg. Second. Second by Leah. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye. And we are adjourned at 8:44. Our next meeting will be on November 12th. That'll be an executive session at 6 PM and a regular meeting at 7.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Great. Stay dry.
Happy Halloween.